Before we start this video, I just want to briefly mention that only 20% of you are subscribed, so if you enjoy the channel, please consider subscribing to support future content. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today, we're going to be discussing a question I presume that all of us wondered to ourselves as children. Can a Muggle become magical? I mean, what young Harry Potter fan didn't secretly hope that their letter was on its way from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry on their 11th, 12th, or maybe even 13th birthday? Of course, I'm keenly aware that invitation letters to Hogwarts are mailed out to children on their 11th birthdays, but would it be so outside the realm of possibility that a child or two had been overlooked on their 11th birthday and had to be contacted the next school year? Letters also get lost in the mail all the time. You know, I'd almost go so far as to bet that each and every one of you watching this video, at one time or another, wondered whether or not you could become a witch or wizard, even without your invitation to Hogwarts. Am I right or am I right? I'm pretty certain that I'm right. In any case, for a question that's clearly been asked by so many children, and perhaps the occasional adult or two, the answer is, dare I say, a little complex. Let's break it down, shall we? To start, let's spell out, pun intended of course, what we're asking here. Can someone born without magical powers gain the ability to perform magic later in life? If I had to give a one-word answer, I would probably simply say no, but I truly don't believe that that covers it. And also, what a terribly lame and boring video that would be for you all. Okay, so anyway, J.K. Rowling has said that nobody knows exactly where magic comes from, but she's also shared that she views magic much like any other talent, popping up in certain individuals, often inherited, but not always. Well, that's that, you may be thinking. Either you're born with it or you're not. But can't certain talents be latent, only to be discovered and perfected later in life? For example, someone with the gift of musicality or athleticism may be predisposed to be good at those things, but then only really shows how gifted they are with a bit of practice. So, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that someone who was unaware they had any magical powers could discover them later on and learn how to wield their gift? But again, I suppose that isn't a Muggle becoming magical, simply a witch or wizard coming late to the party, if you will. Which brings us round to the topic of what makes a person magical to begin with. Well, we've already covered that nobody truly knows where magic comes from, but if we go on the assumption that the talent metaphor best describes what it means to have magical abilities, where does one harbour those powers? Since Rowling has also mentioned that the wizarding gene is a dominant one, it seems fair to assume that magic is, in fact, present within a person's biological makeup. This would mean that wizarding DNA is fundamentally different from Muggle DNA, as it suggests that magical people have certain special genes that give them their abilities, which of course would mean that Muggles are lacking those same genes. This could also explain why some witches and wizards are more powerful and better at magic than others. Magic is in their genes, to varying degrees. It would also explain why most magical children are born to witches and wizards, rather than Muggle parents. That is, they inherit the magical genes. As Rowling says, it's a dominant gene, so this makes sense. But just like the genes that decide a person's hair color or height can seemingly come out of nowhere, such as a red-headed child born to two brunettes, magic can resurface within a child born to non-magical people. I say resurface since, in this instance, it's more likely that a relative or two, way back when, would have possessed magic in their DNA. These magical genes could have then been wiped out by the birth of a Squib, a non-magical child born to a witch and wizard, who then married a Muggle, only to come back about a few generations later. On the topic of Squibs, their very existence also puts a stop to the idea that Muggles could become magical, because, let's face it, if anyone with magical abilities would want to gain the ability to perform magic, it would be a Squib. Without magical talents, Squibs often live within the wizarding world as a sort of outsider, knowing about and surrounded by magic, without the means to perform it themselves, sounds pretty miserable to me. So, if they could become magical, wouldn't they? In any case, if you believe that magic comes from one's DNA, it's pretty hard to argue that someone born without the wizarding gene could later develop it. I think the only possibility here is that a Muggle-born witch or wizard who possesses the gene doesn't realize that they have magical powers until they're informed of it. This is likely the scenario that many Muggle-born students experience after they receive their letter from Hogwarts or any other wizarding school. However, if you don't like the DNA explanation, there is another fun fan theory that I'm rather fond of, that magic comes from one's soul. In this theory, the idea is that magic and your ability to perform it is directly linked to your soul. This could explain a couple of specific instances in the wizarding world of Harry Potter. For one thing, it would account for the magical abilities that Harry possesses only as a result of becoming one of Voldemort's accidental Horcruxes. Typically, a Horcrux is an object that's been created by splitting a wizard's soul into pieces to achieve immortality. However, in this particular case, the piece of Voldemort's soul latched onto the only other living thing it could find, Harry, after he attempted to murder him as an infant. And so, after taking up lodgings inside of Harry, the Horcrux, which is literally a piece of Voldemort's soul, seemed to provide Harry with magical abilities that were also the Dark Lord's. For example, Harry was able to speak Parseltongue, the rare language of serpents that only a select few witches and wizards innately understand. He could also perform legilimency on Voldemort, meaning he could enter the Dark Lord's mind and sense what he was feeling. This was another magical gift that Voldemort also possessed. In terms of today's question, however, I don't think it's really possible to alter one's soul after birth. You're likely born with one soul that remains the same throughout your life, don't you think? And so, even if magic is harbored in your soul, I still don't think a Muggle can become magical. My guess, unless they were inadvertently made into a Horcrux like Harry was. This leaves just one last thing to cover. The fact that in the trailer for the upcoming Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore, Jacob Kowalski, the American No-Maj, is given a wand by Albus Dumbledore. Of course, there are several plausible explanations for why Dumbledore may have given Jacob a wand, which I've explored in great detail in the Harry Potter Theory video, Why Does Jacob Have a Wand? But there's also the possibility that perhaps Jacob has become magical, isn't there? Although, rather more likely, I think, is that if he possesses any magic at all, it's been there all along and he just hasn't been aware of it. Perhaps he's always had a tiny bit of magic, just not enough to be invited to a wizarding school. This would align well with the idea that every witch and wizard have varying degrees of magical abilities. So it's possible to think that certain people could possess an almost undetectable amount of magic. All in all, I think the answer to the question of whether or not a Muggle can become magical is a pretty resounding no. Regardless of if you believe that magic comes from your genes or your soul, I think it's pretty unlikely that magic can be an acquired skill. True, young witches and wizards must attend educational institutions to learn a variety of magical abilities, but one thing remains clear: you must have a predisposition to magic in order to perform it. This is further proven by the fact that Muggles aren't able to wield magical objects, such as wands. For example, James Stewart, the No-Maj co-founder of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, had a wand rebel in response to him casually waving it in the air. As invariably happens when a No-Maj waves a wand, it rebelled. James was sent flying backwards across the clearing, hit a tree, and was knocked out cold. And so, sadly for all of our 11-year-old selves, I don't believe it's possible for someone born without powers to gain the ability to do magic later in life, whether through biology, theology, or education. Which brings us to the end of today's video. As always, I'd love to know what you think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, imperfect understanding is often more dangerous than ignorance.